Seeking Willing Victim by E.H. Amos. So, the killer asked Gale, what made you respond to such an absurd ad? Gale hadn't considered what to say to the monster who was hunting the strictly personal section of New York Magazine. Depression? She asked. Well, the man said, inviting her inside with a wave. That makes sense, but am I just supposed to take your word for it? Gale followed him inside. I can give you some sob story I can't back up. The room just beyond the front door was the living room. There were 2 chairs on opposing sides of a coffee table. Otherwise, the room was nearly empty. There were no bookshelves, no television, no plants. The chairs and the carpet were covered with a clear plastic tarp, but the coffee table was not. On the table was a book titled Illustrated True Crime, a Photographic Record. The cover was a black and white picture of a dead man lying on the street, his trilby hat upside down and a puddle of grayscale blood on the asphalt. The only other exit to the living room was an empty doorframe that led to a well-lit hallway. Nah, the man said as he gestured to a chair opposite his and sat down. Let's just say you have some terminal disease. Dylan, by the way. Sure, it's cancer. I have, Gale shrugged and sat down. 4 days to live. Gale. You look pretty healthy, having only 4 days left to live. Yeah, it's stealth cancer. Look, are you gonna murder me, or... Dylan stood up and shrugged. He walked a few steps down the hallway and turned a corner through a cased opening into another room. You want some tea? He asked through the thin plaster. Only if it's poisoned. Gale felt like a cat watching for a dog, her muscles tense and coiled with the thrill of adrenaline. She reached down to her boots where she had tucked the hems of her black leggings. And a knife. She tugged the switchblade's handle to shift its weight from her ankle, crossing her legs to put the boot in easy reach. Do you want your hot water soaked in green leaves or gray ones? Dylan asked. Coffee beans. Ah, well, sucks to be you. Gale almost smiled. You have no idea. Neither do you. Dylan leaned around the kitchen's corner and smiled at Gale while he waved a claw hammer back and forth. Found my good one. You ready? Born ready. As long as you die ready, then we're set. Let me get the tea real quick. Gale prepared herself for pain. Dylan had to swing first, so Gale could claim self-defense, but with a hammer like that, his first blow would be to her head. As long as she could take the hit anywhere but her head, she would have him. She was sure of it. Gale made it her mantra. He must swing. He must not miss. Protect your head. She thought it to herself several times before Dylan finally came back. He entered the living room with a folding tray in both hands. It held 2 cups of steaming tea and 1 hammer decorated with a splatter of maroon rust over the claws. Dylan bent over to set the tray on the table between them, but locked eyes with Gale and lingered over the hammer. Gale's knife-laden boot twitched. Come on, do it, she thought. She put on her best bored and disinterested look. Do it, you prick. Pick up the hammer and swing. Dylan's gaze finally broke away from hers to flick down for a half-second. There you go. Good boy. Come on. Dylan reached over the tray with deliberate slowness. He smiled as he selected a cup of tea and pushed it towards her. I forgot about the table. Give me a moment. Dylan went back down the hallway. What's his game? Gale thought. He's deliberately trying to goad me into taking the weapon or fighting back, but why? Is he thinking the same thing I am? That if I attack him first, he can kill me and claim self-defense? But then why all the tarps? Surely that would make him look guilty if I were killed in a room prepped for easy body disposal and cleanup. Is the tea really poisoned or laced with something? At that thought, Gale reached out to switch the positions of the 2 cups of tea. The plastic over her chair crinkled with her shifting weight, and she cringed at the sound. She moved quickly, but softly, to switch the cups. Dylan returned with a small tarp that matched the others. Do you mind? He asked, gesturing at the tray of teas and the hammer between them. Gale leaned forward, without uncrossing her legs, and picked the tray up. Dylan fluffed the roll of tarp open with a flick of his wrists and the static of unfurling plastic, and let it gently settle over the coffee table. He sat back in his chair and motioned for Gale to set the tray down. She did. Dylan took his cup of tea in both hands and blew over the top before taking a sip and pretending to sigh in delight. Ah, did you get comfortable? I heard you moving around a little. Yeah, Gale said. Too comfortable. When are we gonna start? You sure you didn't just switch the cups? Dylan asked before he took another deliberate sip, locking eyes with her the whole time. He gestured at her boots with the edge of the cup. Nice stiletto, by the way. Gale was frozen only for a second, before the tense energy in her body deflated. She retrieved the other cup of tea, pulled the switchblade from her boot, and scooted deeper into the cushion. She pressed the button on the knife's handle. It made a sharp snap that echoed once. Now what? Gale asked. Dylan laughed. Good question. I've never had this happen before. How many times have you placed a personal like that? You would be super surprised if you knew how many people answer a serial killer's ad. You're even here. I think it's disbelief and a morbid curiosity. I enjoy seeing the shock on someone's face after they realize they're getting exactly what was advertised. There was a short, self-satisfied moment of silence. You? It makes me less afraid. People can be big, scary, and tough, but no matter who you are, a knife in the right spot will drop you dead as easily as anyone else. You know? Dylan began nodding his head. Do not pass go, do not collect $200. What? Monopoly. Oh, screw Monopoly. Dylan smirked and blew air out of his nose. You really do want me to kill you, huh? Wouldn't be the first time Monopoly made people want to kill each other, Gale said. Oh, come now, what's wrong with it? Monopoly is just rolling and moving. Maybe you buy some stuff. As if that weren't bad enough, it never ends. If I wanted to die a slow and painful death, I'd have just played Monopoly instead of coming here. As if it were a doll, Gale danced her switchblade around her lap on its handle and lowered her voice to mock Dylan's. Oh, look at me. I like outdated board games and tea, and I put quirky personals in the paper, but you know what I don't do? She dropped the mocking tone and locked eyes with Dylan. Kill people. Dylan threw himself out of the chair and over the tray where the hammer was. Gale slipped out of her chair, sliding to the floor in a crouched position. She was about to throw her left arm up to block the first hammer strike, but Dylan didn't have the hammer. He was hovering over it again, but hadn't touched it yet. Gale also didn't move. That's interesting, he said with a smile as he sat back in his chair. Do you claim self-defense? How many have you gotten like that? You could have easily killed me, but you just didn't go for it. You risked your life to guess that? No, I bet on a sure horse. 1, I'm not a horse, and 2, you think you have me all figured out? Look, dude, I don't think this is gonna work out. Dylan nodded in agreement. Yeah, you're right. We'll just spend all our time playing cat and mouse without getting anywhere. I don't usually have this problem because people don't usually bring knives to my house. Gale stood with caution and moved towards the front door, walking backwards and keeping her eyes on Dylan. First time for everything, and you're not wrong. It's kind of like dating. Somebody's got to go first, and... She tilted and shrugged her head. It, won't be me, they said at the same time. To her own surprise, Gale laughed. Yeah, that. Want your tea to go? No thanks. What was in it? Tea. Want me to get the door for you? I'm fine, thanks. Gale bumped into the door and felt around for the doorknob. She found it, but it wouldn't turn. She ran her thumb over the end of the handle and felt the indentation of a keyhole. You sure? Dylan was smiling and holding a set of keys. He shook them at her with a jangling of metal on metal. Toss them to me. I am not giving you my house keys. Fine, but leave the hammer. Look, Dylan said as he stood with slow confidence and grabbed the hammer. This is a crazy coincidence, and it's kind of fun, yeah. When was the last time you were this nervous? I can see it in your face. You're sweating. I can see the goosebumps on your arms. You're clenching your jaw, probably pushing your tongue as hard against the roof of your mouth as you can. On the outside, it looks like you're breathing normally, but I bet you can feel the tightness in your chest. Like those gulps of air just aren't working. The air's too thin, it's just not cutting it anymore. Look, right there. A bead of sweat on your temple. I bet your hands are starting to feel cold. Maybe your fingers going numb and tingly. It's gonna make being accurate with your knife a little bit harder. Gale smiled at Dylan, trying to put on a brave face and make him think he was wrong. But he was right. He must have had more experience than she did at this type of thing. He looked cool and calm, perfectly collected, but with each symptom of fear and panic Dylan mentioned, she became that much more aware that it was true. Exciting, isn't it? He said. It is to me, at least, and that's why I do what I do. So, that being said, I'm going to unlock the door and let you go. But I'm gonna do it while I hold the hammer. Dylan made it 2 confident steps towards the door before Gale crouched in a defensive stance and held her knife out. Hold it! She shouted. Dylan stopped moving, although Gale's command had nothing to do with it. There was a new voice, a third person, another male just outside the door. Everything all right in there, miss? He asked. It was a commanding voice, strong and self-sure. The pair of killers stood still for a second too long. The house echoed with knocking, again. The man's voice grew louder. NYPD, open it up! Gale bobbed her eyebrows once and nodded towards the door. Dylan knitted his own eyebrows together, incredulous, and nodded at the plastic covering everything in the living room. Gale stuck out her lower lip and shrugged. Dylan rolled his eyes and stuck the hammer head first into his back pocket. Gale retracted the blade and dropped the knife back into her boot. Don't break my door, dude, Dylan said. I'm coming, 1 second. He unlocked the door with his keys and opened it. The officer on the other side already had his hand on the butt of his gun, but he hadn't drawn it yet. Ma'am, he called over Dylan's shoulder, you all right in there? Dylan took a tiny step back and gestured at Gale to lean into view. He did not fully open the door. Evening, officer, she said with a smile. We were just, playing a game. Yeah, Dylan said as he glared at Gale. But one of us refuses to play by the rules. The officer snorted. You have any idea how suspicious that makes you sound? What? Dylan asked, turning back to the cop. She said it herself, officer. We were just playing a game. Yeah, well, what if I want to play the next round? Dylan started. He looked at Gale. Never played it with 3 people before. Dylan watched recognition flicker over her face. She chewed on her bottom lip for a second before answering. Sure, why not? Come in, I'll show you what he's talking about, and we can, She looked back at Dylan. We can be on a team. Dylan nodded. Yeah, she's right, officer. Why don't you come inside for a sec? He stepped back and opened the door wide. Why's everything covered in plastic? The officer asked. We're painting, Dylan said. At the same time, Gale said, We're renovating. They looked at each other and laughed. You two are weirdos, and this sounds like weird sex stuff, the cop said. He sighed, deep and weary. I do not want to take a look around, but I'm going to do it anyway because you two are acting weird. So keep your hands where I can see them, over your head, and back up into the living room, but real slow. Dylan and Gale raised their hands and took several slow steps backwards. The officer moved over the threshold, each step careful and calculated, his hand never leaving the butt of his gun. What's this game you're talking about? I don't see a game anywhere. Gale looked at Dylan, still smiling. It's kind of like playing Monopoly. Dylan smiled back.